Good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Solon, the superintendent of the Cheshire Public Schools, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here this evening for our panel discussion of the anxious generation. Before we begin, if you wouldn't mind joining me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is up here, stage right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And on behalf of our panel, I just want to start by thanking all of you for being here tonight. It was kind of a cold and relatively miserable day today, so I appreciate you coming out and spending some time with us for this important conversation. I think for me, this book started back in the spring when I heard Jonathan Haidt interviewed, and what he said was pretty provocative and resonated with me in the sense that, he was talking a lot about social media, the implications for our kids, the challenges that existed pre-COVID and further escalated post-COVID. And I knew that was a concern that not only resonated with me, but certainly was echoed throughout education. And not only the folks that I talked to within the Cheshire Public Schools, but beyond. And I thought that at the very least we should be having a conversation about this. And so we initiated the book talks over the course of the summer and had several hundred people sign up expressing interest in the book, and another 150 people participate in small group conversations with their neighbors and fellow educators around the book. And I think one of the things that jumped out to people, expecting that there was going to be a lot of literature around, or a lot of the text would be centered in social media and cell phone use. I think a lot of the research and the way that it was shared seemed to reinforce a lot of hunches that people had. But what really jumped out to a lot of people that I spoke to was the back half of the book that spoke more about supporting kids and having experiences that challenged them, that forced them to face some adversity and build some autonomy. And that was really kind of a surprise to a lot of the educators that I spoke to, but it also resonated with them. And so tonight is another opportunity to have conversation around that. And the panelists that are here with me this evening all bring a very unique perspective to the book. I don't think any of us sits here and believes that the text itself is the gospel of child raising or anything at all. But it's, again, a provocative look. It really, I think, got a lot of people thinking about how we engage kids around social media and beyond. And that, and what he talks about, that shift from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. So I'm going to invite each of our panelists who are here this evening to introduce themselves, give you a little bit about their background that shaped their perspective on this book, and why they took this book up and decided to participate in this experience. So we'll start with you, Doug.
Good evening, I'm Doug Levins. I'm the Executive Director of the Cheshire Community YMCA. Our programs support about 400 children daily in the town of Cheshire. I've been a Cheshire resident for over 20 years. I have two children who grew up in town, one 23-year-old boy and a 20-year-old boy who both went through the public school system. And there was a lot of things, both personally and professionally, that resonated with me with the book. My kids were on the very I guess, beginning edge of when cell phones really took over some of the child's lives, and just seeing the difference between what my 23-year-old experienced versus what my 20-year-old experienced, and then also reading some of the things about the safetyism concept that Jeff just talked about, and how I see that in the daily lives of the kids in our programs. I wanted to find out how the Y could support Jeff and the school system and the community in trying to better the lives of the kids.
Hello, my name is Penny Leistring. I'm a clinical psychologist, a psychology professor at Quinnipiac University. I've been teaching psychology courses there for over 20 years. I teach courses on mental health, and so this book really resonated with me. Some of the courses that I teach are specifically about children and adolescents and the rising rates of mental health problems that we're seeing in youth. I also this year have been working on a fellowship through Quinnipiac where I've been studying specifically college student mental health, and your kids aren't very far from college, right? It's gonna be there soon. I'm curious about the pathways and what we can do now to make your youth more successful, more resilient, so that when they get to college they can be more successful, because we are seeing a lot more students struggling at the college level than ever before. And I've been trying to do research and read about things that we can do to change the trajectories that we're on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kristen Shanley. I am a teacher at Dodd Middle School. Have been teaching there for 24 years. And and I started off as a language arts teacher and recently have been in the role of the librarian there and also the language arts division leader. In both of those roles, reading is something that's very important to me. So I came upon this book. I was actually familiar with the author from one of his other books, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I read back in 2019. And that, I thought, had some really provocative things in it as well, made you think. And I remember going back to school and sharing those ideas with other colleagues. And so when his newer book came out, I knew, being an avid reader, I wanted to get my hands on it, and being a teacher that deals with teens that are constantly exposed to social media and screen time, I knew it was something that I wanted to dive into.
Hi, my name is Amory Wittenberg, and I've been an educator for 34 years. I'm also the mother of 2 young adult men. My boys are 24 and 26. And I have taught in the classroom, first in South Carolina. I came to Cheshire. I taught at Doolittle, 4th and 6th grade, and about 6 years ago, I transitioned into the role of a reading and math specialist, first at Chapman and now at Highland. And what drew me to the book was that over the 34 years as an educator, I really have noticed a change in student behavior and their ability to school. And I've always been curious lately, especially about why, what are the reasons, and I've kind of just done different readings. And anxiety is something that we see more and more, so when I saw the title of the book, I figured, all right, let me see, I'll read it and give it a try and see what I learn.
Hello, my name is Allison Vitale. I am a longtime Cheshire resident. I've been here since 1976, more or less. I graduated from Cheshire High in 1990. I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom are at the high school right now, ages 15 and 17. I'm also the mother of a very neurotic little dog. Professionally, I'm a pediatrician. I've worked in Wallingford doing general pediatrics for the last 20 years. Over the last few years, I have gone out of my way to do advanced training for mental health care in children, just because of the sheer numbers of kids that we now have coming in who are struggling with anxiety, depression, body dysmorphism, you name it. And when I saw that we were doing a book club this summer on the anxious generation, I felt that both personally and professionally, I really needed to read this book and hear what was going on. And then I found the book to be quite eye-opening and actually very frightening. And so I was very excited to take part in the book clubs and happy to be here tonight.
Thank you very much, and I'll vouch for the fact that Allison's dog doesn't have a social media account, so it's not that. But anyway, just by a quick show of hands, how many of you have actually read the book? All right, so probably better than half. That's helpful for us to know. Penny, you talked a little bit about your experiences and some of the research you're doing, and I think, I get parents that ask me, my kid's already had a phone for 3 or 4 years. If I cut that off, is it too late to stop doing that? What are the benefits that you see, and what do you have to share about that?
Yeah, there's actually really good news on that front. So a lot of the research in the area about social media and mental health is what we call correlational, showing, as social media use goes up, mental health problems go up. But there's actually a lot of new studies that have been published in the last 5 years that are experiments that actually test what happens if you randomly assign individuals to cut down their use on social media or just keep using it the way they've been using it. And for context, adults, college students, youth, we're seeing huge numbers of hours per day on social media. Youth, I think it's 5 hours per day, just social media. Adults might even be higher than that. I think Allison can speak to that later. But so what happens if you cut down your use? Compared to people who keep using it the way they normally do, you see reduced symptoms of depression, you see reduced symptoms of anxiety, you also see decreased symptoms of loneliness. Because just scrolling passively, which is what many people are doing on social media, you don't have the same connection that you do if you cut your use down to 30 minutes a day, right, or even an hour a day. And I'm not saying you have to cut out completely. There are some studies that do that, but a lot of the studies just cut down to 1 hour per day, which is a huge change from 5 hours a day. And that extra time you can do healthier things with. So you even see people doing more active things, having more conversations, going for a walk. But I'm here to say for sure that in as little as 2 or 3 weeks' time, you can actually see a change in mental health symptoms if you can cut down use.
I don't know, maybe this question is for Allison, but I have to believe that the first 2 weeks are if you're spending 5-6 hours a day, and that's not an insane number, even 3 hours a day, and you're cutting back to 1, it's got to be a bit of a transition for a 12-year-old, and you probably get the ugliest response in those first couple of weeks, I would think.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. In the book, he does talk about a period of withdrawal, because when kids are using their phones constantly, there's actually an aspect of addiction to it. So a lot of the apps like Instagram and Facebook, TikTok, they use something called variable reward psychology, so that when kids are posting, they may be getting likes, maybe accumulating followers some of the time, not all of the time. And that actually encourages a behavior where they're constantly going on to try to get more likes, more followers. So that when you do finally take the phone away, and they're not getting those little dopamine hits all the time, there is actually this period of maybe a slight worsening when you're taking away that addiction. And I think what he says in the book is it takes about 3 weeks to acclimate until you start to feel better.
Yeah. I know as a pediatrician you see children through all different developmental milestones. In your experience or upon your recommendation, at what point is it really unhealthy? Is the American Academy of Pediatrics have guidance? Where do cell phones fit into those developmental milestones?
So I think that fits into the question about screen time in general. And there are some guidelines, though not many. So for children who are under 2, the general guideline is to completely avoid screen time. Now, obviously, people are busy, they have to get dinner on the table. Sometimes we need to watch a little bit of TV with the kids. So they recommend for the littlest kids minimal screen time, but if you're going to do it, something educational like Sesame Street, for example. So then we have our slightly older kids, ages 2 to 5. The recommendation for that age group is no more than 1 hour per day, and it's recommended that that also be educational, pro-social. They do recommend that parents watch the TV shows with the kids so that it's interactive. Now, shockingly, for over age 5, there are no definitive recommendations for amount of time for screen time in kids. So if you happen to go online and you Google, well, like what's healthy for any person to be doing with screen time, the AI Google Assistant will tell you no more than 2 hours per day. So when I looked at that stat, my next question was, how long are we actually on our phones? So the age group, my demographic, age 50 to 60 on average, is about 5 hours per day, which is pretty high. But we may be using our phones a little bit differently from the kids. So people may be on them reading books on Kindle, which can be very beneficial. The problem is kids and social media. And I think that's a really individualized question, what is too much for the individual teenager? Some of it depends on personality. Some kids are going to be more vulnerable to falling into that trap of dealing with anxiety and depression. Some of it is a little bit related to sex. So we know that girls are going to be more vulnerable than boys to those internalizing disorders. So it's a complex thing, and I would say it's very individualized. To some degree, it is also personality and temperament.
Yeah, it's maturity, it's supervision, it's what are they exposed to. It's pretty complex. To say zero social media for a 16-year-old might be a little bit bury your head in the sand. We know that kids are developmentally going to be to a place where it is appropriate, and I think just monitoring that is not only what the American Academy of Pediatrics says, but the American Psychological Association and some other resources that I've reviewed. Kristen, when I used to be the principal at Dodd, we spent a lot of time doing silent, sustained reading, and I have had conversations with English teachers about kids, maybe, and that was about 15, 20 years ago. I was principal at Dodd, and I'm curious about what you're observing now with respect to that sustained reading, and maybe even delineating the difference between last year and this year. We've really cracked down on cell phones in the middle school, really at all grade levels, but just curious what you're seeing there.
Sure. So about 15 to 20 years ago, prior to cell phones and, students having cell phones, there was a reading culture at Dodd and a reading community. It was not out of the question for kids to be able to sit and read for 40 minutes at a time. They were able to sustain, they had the endurance to do so. They were able to talk about their favorite author. They were constantly talking about reading. When they finished a test or a quiz, they would open up their independent reading book, and that was just the way that it was. Fast forward to the incorporation of cell phones into their lives and screen time and social media and all of those things, and students' ability to attend to an independent reading book has decreased drastically. It is a struggle often for 10 minutes for our students to sustain for 10 minutes of independent reading time during class. So that is a stark difference, obviously, over the course of time. What we have noticed this year, so with the stricter policy over the course of this last year, the teachers have reported that the students have definitely shown a difference and are able to read for 10 minutes this year without a problem, and are doing a much better job sustaining and would even be able to extend that time past 10 minutes. So that is a positive moving in the right direction.
Sure, so, it's not just necessarily that social media or having your phone on you rots your brain, although there is, a lot of research being done around the neurological changes that occur with extensive use of social media and screen time and phones. But for me, I think the distractions are really a massive hindrance for kids to be able to maintain. I'll be honest with you, I caught myself reading this book in the early summer and occasionally just drifting into my phone. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm 50 years old with a doctoral degree and I'm not focused. And what about a 12-year-old? So it certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm glad that the kids are starting to improve in that regard, but the distractions, I don't know if any of you have Snapchat. I added Snap like 2 weeks ago at the urging of my 19-year-old, who's like, Dad, what are you doing? You gotta have Snap, Snap, it's just so much easier. Oh my God, the level of distractions from Snap. I get an alert like every nanosecond about, hey, you got a friend, you gotta join, and I said to my youngest son and his friends, like, how do I stop this? I'm like, you don't stop that. Like that, and I'm just thinking, a kid who had his phone on him through class, it is almost nonstop. Somebody posted to their story. People I don't even know or friends with, like my kids' friends post to their story, I get a notification. It's overwhelming. And so, I can't imagine trying to read for 40 minutes where every 10 minutes at least you're getting all sorts of notifications. So important that we put those away. But it also told me a lot about when my 15-year-old is doing homework, he can't have his phone with him either. It's just, you can't manage it at that point. I can't manage my phone with those distractions. And so it teaches us a little bit about some boundaries there. Doug, in your unique perspective, and a lot of this book, as I mentioned, is about free play and experiential learning. In your role as the executive director of the Cheshire Y, when you were reading that, what really jumped out to you? What really resonated?
I think there were two trends that we really saw that I see in our aftercare programs that relate to the book. The first one is kids having a difficulty dealing with social situations, such as conflict resolution during play. When I grew up, we spent all day outside and we had to navigate our own issues. Right now, kids are spending most of their playtime doing video games. If they're playing as opposed to playing outside, they have a computer telling them what's right, what's wrong, what's in, what's out, and they don't learn the skill of arguing their point or advocating for themselves. The other trend that I see is that kids really don't know what to do with themselves when given a choice of activities or not given specific directions to complete a project. That's because their entire day is structured and they're not used to having to decide what to do. Like how many of you out there have heard your kids say, I'm bored, when there's a million things that they can do? But that's because you haven't told them what to do and you haven't given them specific instructions.
Yeah, I think, we could all relate to that. I know we were bored when we were kids too, right? But, we didn't have a screen to pacify us the same way that our kids do now. So many of them carrying cell phones, and I drift off with that too, as I'm sure a lot of adults do too. Even if I'm watching a show I like, sometimes it'll just, okay, I'll get into my phone and realize I missed the last 5 minutes of whatever it was I was watching. So getting kids out and engaging with each other is pretty powerful. Anne-Marie, you do a lot of work with our elementary students, and both of our teachers are a little too humble. They're both Cheshire Public School Teachers of the Year at different points. And yeah, exactly. So you support a lot of our elementary students in learning and executive functioning. Can you talk a little bit about any shifts you've seen as it relates to executive functioning for our kids?
Sure, absolutely. And I said before that I picked up the book because I've seen that shift in behavior in schooling. And I will say, and I'm going to admit that when I first started my career, I didn't know that term, executive function skills, but through my professional learning over the years, I've learned it's like an umbrella term that includes all of the skills that I naively used to take for granted, thinking they just kind of magically appeared in me and helped me complete tasks. But I've learned that we need to really nurture and foster these skills. So these executive function skills, it's like an umbrella term, but it's basically the skills that you and I and all of our panelists up here use every day, all day, in order to complete a task. It's how we regulate our emotions and our thoughts so that we are kind of emotionally ready to complete a task or complete a goal. Or it is the steps that we plan out to do in order to complete a goal. It could be a big goal, big project. It could be something simple. I mean, today I had to figure out a way to get to work, do all my work, after work, do whatever I need to do, eat dinner, and get here on time. So that was planning, right? And actually, as I was listening to all the other panelists talking today, I was like, oh look, that's an executive function skill, that's an executive function skill. So what we're seeing in the elementary school is a decrease in, for example, emotional control. Kids are having trouble regulating their emotions. Kids are having more and more trouble. Again, this is year 34, so it's kind of like this gradual wave that has been happening, where kids are not able to maybe tell the difference between what should be a big feeling reaction to something or a small feeling reaction. So they're not sure how to appropriately react when something maybe is disagreeable or when something bothers them. So everything comes out like a big feeling. So kind of regulating their emotions. They have trouble with response inhibition, like thinking, like taking a moment, stop, think, and then act. Or, as Kristen mentioned, just sustaining attention to a task. You know, and as I read the book personally, I don't think it's like we can't blame just the phone, or is it just the social media, or is it the screens, or is it the videos, or is it the lack of free play, or is it the everything is structured, as Doug said, or made me think like, or is it a culmination? Are we, as the author said, like rewiring our brains, because these executive function skills really do need to be fostered and developed with our students, with our children. They also include task initiation, like begin a task, whether it's a task in school, whether it's a task like picking something to play outside, as Doug referenced, or completing a task, which could be just unpack your backpack, put out your supplies, and get ready. Or it could be completing a task for a project, a long-term project, depending on the age of the student. So I just seen overall, like, just a decline in these skills that I used to take for granted, but now I know, right? We have to develop those skills in our young children.
Thank you. The author talks a little bit about a mental health epidemic, and I know one of the criticisms about the book was, maybe that's just because socially we become more sensitive to mental health, and providers are better about diagnosing these things. And there wasn't, one of the criticisms I heard was there wasn't a lot of feedback from students. I mean, certainly I think we can attest, working with students all the time, that there's been certainly an uptick in mental health challenges that our students are facing, but the CDC does a survey of high school students every 2 years, and one of the questions they ask is, have you felt sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 or more weeks in a row, to the point where you've stopped doing your typical life activities? And the survey began in 1999, and 28% of students, high school kids, answered affirmatively to that question, which to me already sounds high and concerning. The peak in that was in 2021, where 42.3% answered affirmatively to that. 2 or more weeks of sadness or hopelessness where I stopped doing regular activities. Okay, that's post-pandemic. It was an incredibly difficult time making the transition back for a lot of kids. But in 2023, that number was still 39.7%. And so that number is clearly alarming, but when you break it down by gender, 53% of girls said that they felt sad or hopeless for 2 or more weeks. 53%. That is certainly an alarming figure. Allison, when you think about the mental health epidemic that we're experiencing, how does that play out in your world? What do parents look for? What about the partnership with the pediatrician? Is that the place to start?
It is a place to start. We've mentioned already that girls are more vulnerable to internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression. And getting back to that survey that you just mentioned, the data on that are really shocking. So very high rates of sadness and hopelessness, high rates of anxiety, and then if you look at suicidal thoughts, 20% of that population discusses having suicidal ideation, 16% have an active plan, and a whopping 9% have actually made a suicide attempt. So that's like 1 out of 10 high school students. So when you look at that, the only conclusion you can come to is that, wow, we have a major problem here. So, as in terms of parents and what to look for in their kids, there are many things. So social withdrawal, spending more time at home, more time alone, more time on the phone. When your child has difficulty putting the phone down, when you think it's becoming an addiction. Things like cutting behaviors in girls can be signs of depression, so you want to be on the lookout for that. Sometimes kids will hide it. They'll purposely wear long sleeve shirts so the parents don't see it. I see this in my office about once a week where a girl will tell me what she's been doing, the parents have been unaware, so you want to look for stuff like that. Sleep disruption. So this is another huge thing with cell phones that we haven't mentioned, but getting an adequate night's sleep is critical for mood, it's critical for school performance and attention. Kids who are sleep deprived tend to be irritable, just like adults. And when we're looking at these phones at bedtime, you've got the blue light coming in, you're disrupting your melatonin, it's going to be harder to fall asleep and to stay asleep. It can lead to your brain racing, thoughts racing. So, when you start to see sleep being compromised, the child dragging physically, that's a big sign as well. If the appetite is off, if they're not eating normally, and so sometimes this is a sign of depression, but particularly in girls, it could be a sign that they are developing an eating disorder. So you mentioned Snapchat, right? Snapchat, I think, relies on looking at selfies and posting selfies. And then kids are going to get a lot of input from other teens through Snapchat, also through places like Instagram and TikTok. They are going to look at a lot of filtered photographs and videos that are going to be unrealistic. Girls tend to internalize what they're seeing. They will easily develop a lot of body dissatisfaction, which can lead to body dysmorphism. I mentioned the cutting already, but then you can also see the development of eating disorders. So you may see kids with anorexia or bulimia, kids whose appetite seems down. So there's a lot of things to look for. And then definitely as a parent, if if the red flags are going up, you want to get help right away. You don't want to try to just deal with it alone. Definitely the pediatrician's a good resource. There are excellent guidance counselors at school as well. And although it does feel difficult sometimes to find good mental health providers in the community, they are out there and they can be reached.
Thank you. I know we have some with us tonight, and the same survey, the CDC survey, asked about high school students who report 8 hours of sleep per night. When the survey first started asking that question in 2007, 31% indicated they received at least 8 hours, and in 2023, it's 23%. So, that disrupted sleep also has an impact on mood, ability to cope, and again, really all this data is skewed in a negative trajectory for females in particular. Another piece of the survey data I found really interesting was percent of high school students who report that they were electronically bullied, and I think it can be easy to think, well, that a lot of these issues come from the way that kids treat each other online. When it was first asked in 2011, 16%, 16.2 indicated they were electronically bullied. In 2023, it's 16.3. So, to your point, Allison, a lot of the challenges, particularly for young ladies, are that comparison piece. And in our book clubs, I would play a song from Olivia Rodrigo. I've played it so many times on YouTube that YouTube thinks I'm the world's largest Olivia Rodrigo fan. I have to try and bring some levity because this has been such a downer, this conversation. But if you get a chance, listen to that Olivia Rodrigo song. It's called Jealousy, Jealousy. And it's really powerful. I know she didn't read the research. I know she didn't read Jonathan Haidt's book. She, from the heart, expresses what she was doing. She says, all I was hooked on was my Instagram feed, and all I kept doing is comparing myself to everybody else. You know, what car they drove, what clothes they wore, how they looked. And I know, as she says in the lyrics, I know that looks aren't necessarily my problem, but I just kept beating myself up over it. It was a terrible place to be. My life was tantamount to my Instagram. And so it's really a powerful lesson, and it's really a powerful song. Doug, he talks a lot about how we socially tend to really overprotect kids in the real world and really underprotect our children in the digital world, in the virtual world. In your role, what do you see there, and any advice that you have for our families?
Well, I think he makes a really good analogy. We've already talked about the underprotection in the digital world, how they have access to everything, and Jeff's given some of the statistics on what that does to the minds of the children, especially to the young females. But what he talks about with the overprotection in the real world, he uses an analogy that kids are like trees, and that they need some exposure to imperfect conditions to grow strong and resilient. And he references a 1980s study that was done where they created an artificial ecosystem for people to potentially have life on other planets. And what they found was that in this perfectly controlled environment, that the trees never reached maturity. And the reason they didn't reach maturity is because they needed stress. They needed wind, they needed drought, and they needed different weather conditions to grow strong. Similarly, the children need to have some adversity while growing up. They need to learn that they can be wrong sometimes. They need to learn to fail, and they need to learn that they can't always get what they want. And I've seen that personally, not necessarily in my role at the Y, but I've spent over 30 years as an alumni advisor at Cornell University for my fraternity, and very similar to what Penny's seen with some of these college students and young adults, sometimes college is the first time they actually ever don't get everything the way they want it, and they don't know how to react. So, my advice to that is allow the kids to fail, because it actually makes them stronger, and allow them to have these little bumps in the road that are going to teach them some of the life skills when they're adults.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, some of this stuff feels like a downer. I'll tell you, I read the book and felt like the world's worst parent. And then I was like, well, I do remember riding on the floor in the back seat of my parents' car with the windows up while they chain smoked, and I survived. So let's all take a collective breath and realize that it's not the apocalypse for our kids. Pat yourself and your neighbor on the back, because we're here to talk about how do we support our kids better, how do we improve their conditions and improve their outcomes. And I think, you know, we've gone through what some of the perils are, and I think it's important to talk about, all right, so we know what some of the challenges are. We've, in kind of grave detail, talked about some of the implications. What about some strategies here? So Penny, if my child is locked in, and with all due respect to my other book club participants, I think my favorite book club was with our high school students, where they taught me the term doom scrolling, where you just sit and you scroll through Instagram, I don't know why they call it doom scrolling, but you're just like locked in, rolling through. You know your child's doing that. How do you break that? Like what steps can you take as a parent to break that? You know you're gonna get pushback.
I think that a lot of the time our kids, and I do have a high school student who's here at Cheshire High, they know when things are unhealthy and they're open to conversations if you'll talk with them about it. Actually had a talk with my son and his best friend when I was driving them to an event. You know, hey, I'm speaking on this panel, what are some of your ideas? And they came up with great ideas and great advice. One of the things that they said is, you know, no phones in the bedroom. You know, you need a good night's sleep, and if your phone's in the bedroom, you're gonna have notifications going off. Some of their friends are, you know, wake up and they're, you know, sending messages at all hours. So you can do something simple like, hey, what do you think? I know you've been used to having your phone at night, but I really feel it's a good idea for you to get a good night's sleep. You know, what if we try this for a week, see how it goes? You know, I think you can have those kinds of conversations. No phones in the bedroom. Certain times where you're gonna turn off notifications or just have no phones. Maybe you wanna get back to, if you're still in the carpool world like me, maybe you wanna have conversations in the car instead of having your kids stare at their phone the whole time, where you ask them a question and they're like, what? What'd you say? You know, so you can have those ideas, like find time, meals, great time to say, nobody's gonna have a phone at the table with them. You can model good behavior, like, you know, like Jeff, like we all may struggle from time to time. I'm certainly no perfect person when it comes to, you know, time on my phone or looking at social media where I should be trying to get something else done. But we can have those conversations, we can model the good behavior, we can say, hey, I'm gonna try doing this. You know, what do you think about trying it? There's also, if you just search digital detox, there are all kinds of apps that you can actually use. So kudos, my upper level psychology course has just completed some projects on the anxious generation, and one of the things they had to come up with was tips that they would give to college students, high school students, younger students, and their parents. And they said, you know, there's all of these things, you should use these, and they found articles online that talked about how to use them. Some of them are called Moment, Space, Realized, but there are actual tools that will help you to help your children to start using their phones less. So those are some ideas.
Well, we appreciate you sharing those with us, and thank your students. You can share those with me, and we can make them available on our website. But it's interesting too, because when I met with the kids at Cheshire High, to hear the girls who are all upperclassmen say, you know what, we need to have a conversation with girls at Dodd and freshmen, you know, because I wish then I knew what I knew now and could approach it that way, and hopefully that will help educate kids. But I think it made me really proud to hear that from our kids, that, you know, they had that altruistic and immediate response to think that, you know, there are other kids that could reframe this and probably not deal with some of the same challenges I had. But another piece I wanted to share is obviously that, you know, if you can start kids not on social media, on smartphones, that's probably the best place to be. And I've had can't tell you countless conversations in my 20 years here as a principal and superintendent with parents who said, you know, I didn't want to get my child a cell phone at that age, but all their friends had it, or, and that was a lot of people tell me that. It's probably 90%, and the other 10% say, well, you know, they're here after for soccer practice, or they were going to DC, or I just wanted to be able to get in touch with them. And I can't tell you I know a lot about this product, but there are flyers out on the table for a product called Pinwheel. You can purchase a phone through any provider, really, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, or some of the main carriers in our area. And it looks, you know, like a standard smartphone. May not be an Apple or Samsung, but it has texting feature, phone features, location features. You have the ability to add over time other apps to that phone, and you can see what your kids are doing on that phone. And it seemed like an interesting thing to explore. Like I said, I don't know it in detail. I can't endorse it or anything like that, but there are flyers here if you're interested in taking a look at something like that, so that developmentally you're controlling. And because Allison said, you know, the guidance is not exact right now. You know, I know wait until 8 is something that the book talks about. There's an organization, wait until 8th grade. I don't think that's a bad idea. As I've said before, my brother teaches German. I'm more inclined until 9. I'd rather, you know, just keep the social media away from our kids, but I don't know if that's realistic. So you have to, as a parent, make the best decision for your children. And this is one way to kind of place guardrails on that access until you and they are ready to navigate that. Doug, how can our kids engage in more experiential play?
Some of the things that we do in our aftercare programs, we really focus on free play, and we give them choices of things, and just giving them the choice gives them that option to choose what they want to do. The other thing we do is we provide them with supplies. Like if we're doing indoor activities, we may give them paper, crayons, pen, we'll have a bunch of pipe cleaners, or we'll have a bin of Legos or blocks, so that they have to use their own creativity to figure out what they want to do. Sometimes we'll have them make up games. Like outside, we'll bring out hoops and balls and different things that they can utilize in the game, but not give them the rules and tell them this is how it's done, where they have to figure out what they're doing. So it's more just giving them tools, encouraging them to be creative and figure out what they want to do to have fun.
Thanks. And the structured activities that our kids engage in are pretty extensive, not just, you know, youth sports and music and things like that, but I know the pressure parents can put on themselves. You know, when we were kids, a Burger King birthday party was extravagant. Now, David Copperfield made a pony disappear in my backyard. Just doesn't seem good enough anymore. So, you know, we put these standards on ourselves that aren't great for us, and you know, there's a lesson to be had in teaching kids to make do with things and experience, like you said, create on their own and come up with things. Those are skills that are going to be in tremendous demand as your graduates of the class of 2040, potentially, depending on the audience here, are ready to move on. Kristen, you deal with middle school students, and you know the social pressures that exist there. What if all my son's friends or my daughter's friends have a social media account and I'm not ready? Like, how do you even begin that?
So I think what you had said before about how there's not necessarily, like, if you can encourage wait until 8, or that's great, but obviously we're in the middle school and the large majority of kids are on social media. We were actually talking about that even sports teams are communicating via social media apps. And so if your child is involved in that sports team, it's difficult for them to feel connected to the sports team or the activity that it is, and if they don't have that social media account. So I'm not sure that I have any wise words on this topic, because I do think it is a challenge, and I think you kind of have to hit on it on a case-by-case basis. And there's some social media that I think may be more appropriate than others, and if you can just keep tabs on your child in terms of what apps they're on and how much time they're spending, and know that you most likely own the phone and purchased the phone, so it's okay for you to look at what your child is doing on the phone.
Yeah, and I think some of that is give yourself permission, but I know, I had 2 sons. One would be fully cooperative, the other reached banshee level at times when you're dealing with the phone and stuff, and all of our kids are different. And so I knew if you're hitting banshee time, you're telling me that you can't manage your phone right now. That's gotta improve my resolve to make sure you don't have it. And so teaching those lessons can be pretty powerful. And the last, I want to just take a few minutes to get pieces of advice, closing words from each of our panelists, and then open the floor to any questions that you may have. So, Dr. Beitel, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So Jonathan Haidt does make a few recommendations at the end of the book. So he recommends no cell phone, no smartphone until 9th grade. I think that's a great idea. No social media until age 16, which again, it's got to be a little bit individualized because every kid's in a unique situation. I do think that we have a time limit on when, as parents, we can really regulate these phones, because once the kids turn 16 and they're driving, they need the phones with them for getting from point A to point B and following directions. So it becomes a lot harder as they get older. So our big opportunity really is when they're younger, and the critical time of brain development. A lot of changes are going to be going on in early puberty, those years between like 9, 10, 11, 12. Those are the years in which we're going to be really careful, because kids are forming social relationships, they are differentiating from their parents, there are incredible social and cultural changes going on in that age group. So that age group in particular, we want to really limit the use on the phone and exposure to some of the more damaging social media apps.
So my piece of advice would be advice I had to give myself. When I started reading the book, I think after the first few chapters I had to put it down, because I was going back in my memory when my boys were younger, and I started second guessing myself, and I would go down a negative rabbit hole. So I had to stop and give myself grace. So I would say the same thing. Whether you are reading this book or just having conversations or gathering this information, whether you are a parent of a young child, an adolescent, whether you're a grandparent, a caregiver, a coach, whatever your role, think about this information and how you could use it going forward. Don't look back, don't second guess anything. Look at all this information and think how it's best for you and your family and how you could use it going forward.
My piece of advice has already been hit on a little bit, but I'm going to add to it. So that is removing the phones from the bedroom so that you get a better night's sleep. And that goes for all of you in the audience and any children that you are raising. And also, I'm going to add on to that, you can take the phone out of the bedroom and add a book to your bedside table. That's that.
I would just add one piece that I think we haven't talked about maybe as enough. When you're on social media, There's a big difference between just passive scrolling and looking at what's there and actually being active and liking and interacting, like actually commenting on people's posts and sending messages. There's actually data to say that the passive scrolling is worse for your mental health, and that the actually engaging is healthier. So like letting your children know, that how they use social media actually may also impact their mental health, not just the pure amount of time that they're on it, but overall striking a balance. So yes, they're gonna spend time on their phones and social media and video games, but what else are they doing? What's on their plate? Do they have time to do other activities where they're having face-to-face time with peers, which I think is critically important?
I guess my piece of advice is going to go back to the overstructuring and the safetyism of the kids, and just allowing them to be creative, allow them to experiment a little, and give them leeway to just find their own way with different activities. And a great way to do that is just, get outside. That can be with your, elementary school kids, it can be with your teenagers, and it's also good for yourself. Just get outside and get off the phone.
Thanks, guys. 3 quick pieces, just piggybacking on what Doug shared. I remember one of our parents in the book club talking about supporting her daughter, young daughter, probably 8, 9 years old, cutting a lemon. And her gut response was like, oh my God, you're gonna cut your arm off. And it's like, okay, it's only a lemon. I can work through this with her and teach her how to do it. And the sense of pride and accomplishment they both had when she did that successfully. Kids are capable of more than we give them credit for. And of course, there are certain things that you need to be a little bit more concerned about. And people, that's your choice, but I guess it's just be conscious of that. After I finished reading the book, my son had just turned 19, completed his freshman year at college, and he had to listen to me cite the book to him every 3 days, and had been punished adequately for all the sins of my past. And he says to me, Dad, you only have to say yes. I'm like, oh boy. He goes, I want to go to Australia to visit my girlfriend for 10 days by myself. And he's just turned 19. And, we had to make a decision. And he made a lot of money last summer, was able to do it. And when I stepped back and, the initial response is, are you kidding me, dude? No, in my head. But, 19-year-olds fight wars. My son had been on plenty of flights, and he did it. And it was an amazing experience for him to go to Sydney and travel Australia. So you think about what's developmentally appropriate, and just, I guess, take a step back and say, what support am I really looking at this in a way that helps them grow and develop? The other thing is probably more sensitive. I worry a lot about our boys and our girls as it relates to pornography on the internet, and the fact that our kids have seen probably more than any of us ever saw growing up on the internet, and thinking that that might be a normal sexual relationship. Please talk to your sons about that, and dating violence, and your daughters about what's appropriate. It's probably an uncomfortable conversation, but when they get to that age, it's an important conversation. And then finally, on a much lighter note, Dodd will be hosting Screenagers on November 13th at 6:30. For those of you that are interested, we'll put that out, but this is just a quick heads up announcement. And so with that, I want to invite anybody who'd like to come down. You can come to either of the mics up front if you have a question for any of our panelists. We'll certainly entertain any questions that you might have. Please.
So our daughter's a dot. She uses it a lot for texting, face chatting, doing homework with her friends. Do we keep that in consideration on time, or is that more allowable because she is interacting with her friends while she's doing homework or they're chatting as opposed to scrolling?
I think, you know, my hot take is, I'll pass this on to the panelists, but you know, every parent has to determine what is appropriate for their child, and I'll pass it off to you guys. Penny, you know, maybe you want to take, what should a parent be looking for to make sure that it is a positive and constructive use of the phone?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's fairly typical. A lot of the assignments that, you know, my son had at Dodd, they were group assignments. And so I think it would be really difficult to tell your child that they can't communicate, you know, with a device, with, you know, to get those things done. Sometimes they meet at the library, you know, there's definitely other options as well. But that, as far as all the things to be concerned about, I'm much less concerned about having communication, you know, via FaceTime or chats, you know, about homework and doing projects.
Yeah, and on our Google platform, you can communicate through Google Hangouts or things like that, and that information is screened, where if, you know, there's inappropriate language, you know, threats of self or others, you know, there's a notification that gets triggered. I'll get calls middle of the night sometimes about these things if there's a real concern. So that's another way to do it if it's not on the phone. So there's options there. Anybody else with any questions for any of our esteemed panelists?
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you, as always, for doing what you can to put our children first in their best interest. Also for bringing this book, this conversation, this topic to the community and to our awareness. The book itself was definitely very thought-provoking. Anne Marie, I love your comment on greeting it with some grace. For sure, but I want to kind of piggyback off of some of the conversations about decreasing tech time. And obviously, if you've read the book, you know this isn't just all about technology. It's not all about social media. It's a combination and a compilation of a lot of things. But in order to move past the epidemic, the pandemic, whatever you want to call the crisis right now in mental health, the idea of decreasing screen time and the idea of perhaps limiting, and the research that you're finding that backs that up, where is Cheshire in the discussion? Like some of the districts have already gone to yonder pouches or device or, you know, technology in order to kind of pull back whether or not we have willing participants as far as our children go during school time to help increase the executive functioning, perhaps the attention spans and things of that. So where's the district as far as that? Because I know other districts in the state have gone into the pouches this year or upcoming years.
Sure, thanks, Liz. The question about yonder pouches, for those of you who don't know, students arrive at school, they drop their phone, assuming it's their phone, in a pouch that is magnetically locked. At the end of the day, they can be unlocked. And I talked to superintendents. That's super hard to police. Like I said, you know, you don't know that it's your phone, that it's their phone that they're dropping in, that it's a live phone, that whatever the case may be. For us, it can't be out during the day at Dodd. The high school has slightly different rules. There is a little bit more freedom, but there's been a significant shift in how we treat it at the high school as well, about a uniform. You can't have your phone out during class, period, end of story. And what the feedback that I've had from middle and high school educators is a significant shift in what they've seen in school. I was just telling a group today, walking down the halls of a high school, the number of students who engage me is dramatically different than it has been in the last couple of years, because they're not on their phones. Not everybody's wearing earbuds like it had been, you know, post-COVID. It's a much different scenario. So, you know, and yonder pouches are really expensive. I don't know that that's the best investment for us if we're not going to get a significantly different environment than the one that we're experiencing. So right now, I would say we're not there. And the screen itself is not as much the issue, I think, as, you know, these organizations have said that it's much more about what you're doing on the screen that's the worst part of it. I think Allison mentioned, you know, reading a Kindle or, you know, reading a book on a screen. There are appropriate uses, and the reality is that most of you, I'm sure, go to work and have to engage in screen time too. That our kids are going to have to use technology. It's probably going to only become a more significant part of their life with AI in our lives. So we have to also balance teaching kids those skills to be successful. So I think we're trying to be real sensitive to what sort of exposure they're getting, when they're getting it. And our community has really doubled down on education about appropriate use and those things, rather than just thinking if we set up a rule to no phones during the day, that'll be adequate, because that's really, I can't even call it half the battle.
Thanks so much for your time. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about whether there's a benefit or a pro or a con to texting versus maybe chatting or like real-time talking, you know, when they see their faces. I mean, my kids are fairly young, so this book to me came at a great time. They're 11 and 7, but already the 7-year-old and even the 11-year-old, if I'm just on the phone, they're like, well, where's the picture? Or I don't even know what you're doing, really. And so it's hard for me to imagine that, you know, they're gonna be talking at length just on the traditional phone like we think of it, but they definitely seem to like the video chatting. And when I think about it, it has some benefits of, you know, being able to read like facial expressions, real-time kind of formulating speech versus texting and kind of half sentences. I don't know if any of you have thoughts on this or have looked at some of the research, whether there's a benefit to encouraging them to, you know, video chat versus just text all the time, which I see that my undergrads love to text.
Can I take this one?
Sure, please.
Okay. So yeah, being able to see somebody's face is very beneficial. So when you think about like a 2-month-old baby, like already by that tender age, they do have a social smile, and that is based upon that back and forth interaction between the baby and the loving caregiver. One smiles, the other smiles, one laughs, back and forth. It's a wonderful thing, but it requires you know, looking directly into somebody's eyes. And you know, the same thing can be said for slightly older kids. Remember that important age group of like 9 to 11, when they are developing socially and they're learning how to respond to body language and facial cues and tone of voice. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with video chatting. I think it's good. I think more in person is better, you know, always less with the tech if possible. But I do think that a video chat's going to be a little bit better than texting.
The other thing is you can wait 3 years and they'll probably be able to talk to a 3-dimensional holograph. I mean, that's the reality. And we think about that educationally, as I was saying, that, you know, we're preparing our kids, you know, closing in on the class of 2040 that are coming into school. How do we prepare our children that are becoming educated in our school system over the next 12, 13 years for that world? And so you know, ultimately our kids will be dealing with those things. They'll be writing the programs that provide the code for holographs and everything like that. So I agree with the benefit of reading faces and seeing expression is probably definitely more valuable than just chat, than texting, and probably a little bit more valuable than just a phone call, but trying to do what you can to engage the kids socially with the facial expressions is always positive. Please.
I just want to comment more to your point, but more towards like the high school kids. Right now, a lot of the kids are spending so much time communicating via these social media apps, and it's not real authentic communications. It's something that they've had to spend a lot of time deciding, okay, what is the right word, what is the right picture, what is the reaction gonna be. So for people that have kids in middle school, kids in high school, one of the things that I would encourage also is to look for opportunities where they're disengaged from the phones, or the phones are not down, and they can have real authentic conversations so that they learn these social skills and reading cues of people's faces and their body language, and just being able to express themselves without having to worry. You know, if you have a conversation, if I say something to Jeff, I can read right away, oh, that was the wrong thing to say, but it doesn't blow up on social media and make me a pariah. So they need to learn these skills. So just being able to shut down, put the phones down, and actually have authentic conversations is very important as well.
Yeah, or they're, you know, you're having friends over, put all the phones in the hat, or, you know, by the front door, or, you know, do those things, or you go out to lunch or something, and all your daughter's friends are together, put the phones away, you know, over here. I'll hold them during lunch. You know, setting those boundaries is really powerful, and giving them the opportunity to engage each other. They'll have so much fun. Initially, you'll be, you know, the jerk that took the phones away, but they'll, you know, they'll benefit from it.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're making this a community effort. And my son's the oddball. He's in 7th grade. He does not have a smartphone. He has a phone where he can call me and text me. And it's amazing for him. How can educators help normalize it for the kids who don't have one?
That's a great question, and I think one of the suggestions in the book that we would like to adopt in the elementary grades is really that sort of pledge that, like you said, normalizes something like a pinwheel phone, or like the phone that I don't know what brand you have or whatever, but because like I said, the parents that have expressed to me, like, I didn't want to do this, but I felt like I had to, it's a significant percentage. A lot of parents have said that to me. So creating a platform for them to be able to say, yeah, I'm not the only one. No. There are, 20% of 5th grade parents at Highland said they're not signing their child, they're not going to give them a smartphone until they're, in 8th grade. I feel better, like, yeah, I'm not alone. And so we need to figure out a platform, how to roll that out. I appreciate that question.
Hi, so when I was first reading this book, when I was first assigned it, I was a little nervous as a young person reading a book about my generation from someone not of my generation. How do we create this sort of communication across generations? Because I think a lot of people my age will dismiss what they're hearing about this if they're just hearing about it from their people their parents' age.
Great question. I think that it's really important to have dialogue, and it can't be just older individuals or parents or teachers or administrators saying this is what it has to be. I think it has to be a dialogue, because I think our youth know that things are not okay. And they can look at that data, like the CDC poll and other Gallup polls about the rates of mental health problems, the rates of emergency room visits from our teenagers right now, for self-harm and other psychiatric crises. I think you can have these conversations and then say, like, so let's work together about how we're going to solve these issues. I think that one of the problems is that it's not just, oh, we're going to tell you to cut this out, don't do this, and my generation had it so much better and everything's terrible. I think that, sure, like for some folks, especially isolated communities, some folks might find their people online in some groups. Like it's not 100% bad, the social media, but you can talk about, well, when is it bad? How does it affect your body image? How does it affect what you're seeing? What kinds of things are you getting in your feed? And talking about the benefits of cutting down. I will say I have been surprised, not Jared's course at Quinnipiac right now, but in other classes I've had there, where they're like, oh yeah, things are terrible. And then I say, okay, so how much time do you think teenagers should spend on their phones? And they'll say, no more than 4 hours a day. And so we're still at a big divide, right? Because I'm horrified that that's their answer. But they think that that's better than the 5 or 6 that they might already be spending. But I think we need more dialogue to try to meet in the middle. But great question.
I can just add one more thing. So I have a 26-year-old, so it's about similar with your age there, and he doesn't have much with social media. Doesn't it's off and on. He's got the accounts. He checks it every once in a while. But ironically, when I was sharing with my family that I would be participating in this panel, he was like, "Oh wait, he hadn't read the book, but he had heard of the book and the ideas and the information presented in the book through his feed." So it's out there, and he was like, "Oh, that's what I was saying." So it's out there and it's getting communicated, which I guess I thought I was pleasantly surprised that he had heard about it, which actually sparked a conversation out with both of my boys.
And I'll add one more thing, but when I read the book, I thought, wow, wouldn't this be a great course at Cheshire High School, right? Because kids never want to hear it directly from their parents. They're looking for role models outside. So I think to do this book as a course where kids are taught about variable reward psychology, addiction, what is the foundation of social media, I think would be fabulous.
And they can come down and teach the dad students.
Well, that's why I was saying, it was so cool to see our kids who read it immediately offer that up. Like, there are things I wish I knew that I know now. Not just exclusively through reading the book, but as with the benefit of a little more wisdom as you get older, and I think that's great to have our kids doing that. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for hosting this. So I'm a mother of 3 children. When the kids are young, it's very easy to take them to a playground, and there are kids their age. When they are 8, 9, 10, 11, you take them to a park, there's no one there their age. Do you have suggestions for parents who want to have their kids engage in more experiential play of how to actually make that happen when the other kids aren't around?
Sure. We have been working with our elementary PTOs on providing more free play times that are not as structured. Just provide the opportunity to have somebody there to supervise while other students are playing. The other thing that the book talks about, and we've had conversations with the folks, the architects who are working on our 2 new schools, is that a lot of the playground equipment has really been sterilized to limit any risk of any sort of injury or things like that, which actually the research has said make them a little riskier, because then kids misuse the equipment that's there and are more likely to be injured. So we are looking at more adventure based play areas. If you've ever been to Darcy School, that's an example for younger kids about what that would look like. But our playground designer, the architect, was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. We're having this conversation because usually I'm trying to convince communities why it's important to do this. And we came to the table and said, what do we have to do to make this happen? And so I'm hopeful that the next two playscapes that are built have more of that built in. But in the meantime, trying to schedule things for our kids to get together at their local schools or other schools in the district to have those opportunities. Any other, please?
Yes, I'm very, very grateful for this evening. So happy to see this conversation happening. 2007, I think Google wrote a public paper called All You Need Is Attention. And we talked a lot about ways we can try to, obviously, taking them away during school time, but the skill set is actually still a skill set of attention management. In the education side of your initiatives, are you focusing on, it's not just social media that is grabbing your attention, and that technology is specifically going after that attention? How do we teach kids to manage it? It's not going away. We ourselves are struggling to model it in front of them and live it and figure out all the right ways. But there's skill sets that are here that don't actually require technology to address. And what does that look like, and what can families do at home to support that?
Just today I met with our peer health educators at Cheshire High School, coaching them around communication skills, active listening. My initial master's degree is in counseling and psychological services, and I kind of backdoored into education. So teaching the students the explicit skills to become a better listener. Attention, I think, is something that both of our teachers talked about tonight. I think there's probably room for us to grow in that respect. We're, 4 or 5 months into a process that probably will take some more time and energy, but that's good feedback and a way for us to look at what we do through health, through core content areas, to better educate our kids, not just about attention, but how companies have profiteered off gaining your attention. And to your initial point about Google, we had a parent in one of our book clubs who said she had worked for a large social media company, and it's all about clicks and dollars, and the number of kids today who indicate that they want to be influencers as a profession is alarmingly high. And so, educating our kids about that, we have to find a way to weave that in. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much. I just want to follow up on that. I think it'd be a great topic to bring to the youth of Cheshire, to ask them how would you want us to, and what would you want us to teach you about, incorporate them in the initial steps to then have buy-in on the program. I think that would be great. The other comment would be, or question, is we talked quite a bit about identifying in the polls that you had in females of different mental health risks. What about males? Are they not at this age able to open up like they aren't able to open up as adults as more readily? And is that being seen in these polls or even thought of in these polls?
Sure, so the polls are anonymous questionnaires for kids, so it really, it requires the student to self-select. These are high school age only, the CDC poll. I think, making sure that we're reaching boys is certainly really important as well. Penny, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit to just the psychological development and needs and data that you're seeing.
Well, we are seeing an increase in mental health problems with males as well. It's just not to the same degree that we're seeing with girls. But the rates have increased over the decades for boys too. It's just with girls, Jeff talked about the rate. It's just shocking. But in general, as Allison said, boys are less likely to have depression or anxiety than girls. We haven't tonight talked much about children who are gender nonconforming, but that is a group that in general has higher rates of depression and anxiety, so we don't want to leave them out as well. But boys often may have different issues than girls. Girls are more depression, anxiety. Boys tend to see more behavioral problems, conduct problems. And that's, again, on average. You can certainly see a child of any gender having any problem.
The other thing that the book doesn't really talk about a lot, but I know it is an exploding problem in boys at the high school and collegiate levels, is gambling, online gambling, sports book gambling. If you're interested, 60 Minutes, if you just Google, did an incredible piece on that, and how just like with social media and adolescence, all the algorithms are designed to hook you in. My son's friends talk about it all the time online. They can tell you parlays, what all these terms mean, and it's really concerning to see the number of kids that lose a lot of money that their families don't know about, and what it does to their mental health. It's worth looking into as well, but that's typically an older male problem, late high school, early college development.
To piggyback off what the young gentleman here said, and then Jeff, you mentioned the movie coming up.
Sure.
The high school kids that were interested in helping out in DOT, is that something that they can get some kind of community service credits or school credits, and they can come to that movie if that movie's for the students, or get them there this year? Because I think,
oh sure,
I don't want to wait.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think we need to incentivize it for our kids. They want to help now, and that they're doing this really of their own volition. It's not even anything that we've had to arm twist so far. I think we'll express our gratitude for them doing it, but just organizing that and orchestrating it will be enough to get them there.
Because I think that'll help the parents.
Yeah, oh sure.
Do this.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's needed.
And it's intergenerational as opposed to intragenerational as opposed to intergenerational conversations are really beneficial. Yeah.
Thank you.
Speaking of which, I think we had this question for him.
Well, this is unrelated to my question, but related to that. I participated in the other book club group, and we were talking about going to the middle school and having a discussion about it, and not because we're being incentivized, but because we're living through it ourselves and we have our own personal experiences to speak upon, and dealing with mental health issues ourselves. It's really important for us to help kids who are younger work through their own issues because we've been through it ourselves. Okay, anyways, my question. So, if kids are using technology during the developmentally critical stages of life, and it's having detrimental impacts on their social and problem-solving skills, are those impacts irreversible, or can it be fixed over time?
So I'm not the psychologist or the pediatrician on the panel, but I do believe that yes, these these skills can be taught, especially when the school and the home work as a partnership. So the teachers and the parents working together to instill and teach these skills in at least the younger students.
I can at least talk about social skills. Like I'm actually seeing way more college students that tell me things like, I'll only order a pizza if I can do it on an online form. They don't want to make a phone call. Those are skills that can be taught, right? You all can get your kids used to interacting with store clerks, not going through self-checkout every time, but actually talking to someone else, having conversations. And yes, if somebody has anxiety, that may be really hard for them at first. But the basic treatment that works to treat anxiety is what we call exposure therapy. You make someone little by little do things that are a little scary for them to get this sense of accomplishment and to learn that this is okay, I can do this, I can have a successful experience. And so I think the same thing with problem solving, social skills, give them the practice, give them the space and the encouragement and the support to do that. And some of it's modeling, bringing in peers that are skilled, that they can watch, not just adults, but so, oh, okay, I can see how to do that now, I'm gonna try that myself.
So I know our panelists aren't going to evaporate, we'll be around, but I want to close by thanking all of you for coming today. I think community education is a really important part of better supporting our kids and our families, to put them in a position to help make our children more successful, and you're a big part of being here tonight. I really appreciate you all showing up. I also would encourage you to tell a friend. We'll put this out on YouTube probably tomorrow, and if you just ask them, hey, check it out when you have a second. I know not everybody can make this time. And finally, if you wouldn't mind, please giving our panelists a warm round of applause. So again, there are resources on the table as you exit. If we're out of resources, as I'm told we may be, they'll be available on our website. I'll put those out through Parent Square tomorrow as well. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight. Have a great night, everybody.